Welcome everyone to our YouTube lecture number 18. Welcome to Hooverville, population U. We talked a little about Hoover in class today, and this is just to reinforce some of the things that we already have learned and just to put it up here in PowerPoint format for you so you can take some notes. Don't forget to go to Edmodo and print out the video log that goes with this particular video. All right, so let's look at, first of all, the essential question. Page 720 through 721 of our textbook, you can find the answers for this. How did President Hoover respond to the economic emergency? And why did he choose the course of action he did? So that basically guides then what this lecture is about. So let's talk just briefly about Hoover. In 1928, Calvin Coolidge is the President of the United States. America is very happy with him. He could have ran in 1928, but he chooses not to. So the Republicans decide to turn to another famous individual for them, Hoover. And if you remember in the 24 election, they had the campaign of Keep Cool with Coolidge. Here they have Who but Hoover. What a great slogan, right? Who but Hoover. On the platform of prosperity and prohibition. This is, again, the era of prohibition, and the Republicans are supporting it, while the Democrats nominate Alfred Smith, or Alcohol Smith. Now, he's not an alcoholic. He's called Alfred Alcohol Smith because he ran on the campaign that he would end prohibition. He's the first Roman Catholic in American history to run for President of the United States. Of course, the next one will be JFK, John Kennedy. In this election of 28, radio was very prominent for the first time. Campaign ads were run on radio. Speeches were given on radio. So a new technology was very, very important. And I've mentioned this to you before. Hoover was a true rags to riches story. He was born in Iowa and to Quaker parents. They both passed. His mom and his father passed when he was young, basically leaving him an orphan. But his mom had been able to put away some money for his education. He wound up at Stanford University, and then he invested in gold mines in California and China and became a millionaire. So he is a real rags to riches story. He believed in American individualism and free enterprise and small government, everything that the Republican Party believed in the 1920s. Of course, things go very bad very quickly for him. As we read that article in class on Hoover, the wrong man at the wrong time, he gives a wonderful inaugural address. Great times are here, a wonderful civilization, prosperity, and then within 7 months, the roof caves in on everybody, right? So here are just some things I want you to know. Some of the causes of the Depression. While people thought in the 1920s they're living in an endless time of growth and fun and jazz, there were a lot of problems going on. There was the unorganized wage earner, the individuals who did not belong to labor unions, who were mostly unskilled workers, and there were millions of them, and their wages were were stagnating. They weren't growing anymore in America. The disorganized farmer. Long gone are the Grange movements, although there is a Grange still out there, but it's not nearly as popular as it was, so the farmers are not organized anymore, and this is a problem. There's overproduction in America, both farm and factory. They're building cars that nobody is buying anymore, the new refrigerators and dishwashers, plus they're growing food that nobody's eating. This leads to a terrible supply-demand situation where there is a surplus and no one is eating up that surplus, so prices begin to fall while stock prices were climbing higher at the same time. And a lot of Americans who normally never played the stock market are now getting involved in the stock market, but it really wasn't a real thing for them. I mean, as we talked about, this thing called buying on margin, right, where the banks are loaning you up to 90% of the value of the stock, and all you had to do is come up with about 10%. But they weren't telling individuals that they had call on margin. So individuals were rushing to, for instance, the example we talked about in class was General Electric, within a year's time, it climbed to $396 a share. And people were just freaking out, thinking they're going to become rich, 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 rich. And so this get-rich-quick mentality, this self-indulgence society just for pleasure, the 1920s became just all about this. There's also, again, too much money at the top end and not enough into wages. There's an overextension of credit. A lot of people are buying things now on credit. Get something now, pay later. Also interesting, this thing called normal technological unemployment. When technology changes, that often leads to unemployment. And what I mean by that, well, for a long time, there was an industry in America that employed thousands, and that was the ice industry. Literally, people would have an ice truck pull up to their house. A gentleman would get out, grab a big block of ice with giant tongs, and carry it into your house and put it into what was known as an ice box. And there's where you kept your food, in an ice box. There was a big chunk of ice that would last a week or so, and about every week to 10 days, the ice truck would come by and you'd buy another chunk of ice. Well, now technology changes. We're going to have refrigerators. We don't need the icemen anymore. We don't need ice boxes in our house. So there go all those individuals who worked in this industry for decades. It's now gone. And that's a normal thing. Technology always shifts unemployment. And as new technologies come in, then those individuals usually go and get education so they can have a different job or get into the new types of technological industries that are being created. But this was also becoming a problem in the 1920s. And of course, October 29th, 1929, Black Tuesday, where the stock market crashed. And by December, some $40 billion in securities just gone. We also had the issue with Europe and its inability to recover from World War I. Now, with all this happening now, we're not yet calling it really the Great Depression in 1929 because there's this hope that maybe the economy and the stock market will right itself by 1930, but Republicans do panic and they pass one of the highest tariffs in American history. This Hawley-Smoot tariff of 1930. It is the highest tariff in peacetime. The tariffs, as you know, tax on imported goods. Now, they're trying to protect American industry because America is now going into the grips of a depression. So the tariff rate went from 38.5% on imported goods to 60%. 60% tax on imported good. This basically was a declaration of economic warfare on the world. And what happens when you pass such high tariffs? Well, the world began to boycott American goods, and many countries reciprocated by placing their own high tariffs. Originally, they promised farmers that the high tariffs would protect them on their produce. We had 75 various agricultural products that this tariff was placed on, but it also placed the tariff on 925 manufactured goods. This was a nightmare, right? This tariff, it created nothing but animosity in the world toward the United States, and men like Adolf Hitler. Yes, Adolf Hitler will look at the Hawley-Smoot tariff and say, look what the West does to us. This is why we can't trust them. So in essence, it helped put the Nazis in power because the Nazis are going to look at what America does. Look then what the entire West winds up doing. They all pass these high tariffs. We can't participate now in international trade. We need to create our own system. So this tariff turned out to be one of the greatest nightmares in American history on an international scale. As we mentioned in class, though, Hoover is often referred to as the do-nothing president, which is totally unfair. He did do some things. We get a Reconstruction Finance Corporation passed in 1932. This was government lending to banks. Some $500 million was put aside to lend to banks. The Norris-La Guardia Anti-Injunction Act, 1932. This was to help labor unions in America. It outlawed the anti-union contracts. My phone started ringing there. Sorry about that. So anti-union contracts. You could not have a factory, for instance, and tell people you couldn't join a union. Right? They stopped that. If you want to be in a union, you can be in a union. Strikes and boycotts and picketing, as long as they were peaceful, would now be legal. So this was a way to try to help unions, to stimulate growth, again, within the working class, hopefully to help a business to be stimulated. Of course, all this is a little too little. Does that make sense to you? A little too little? It just really is. It's not going to do much to stimulate the economy. Hoover, though, would not do anything that he thought seemed socialistic. Congress tried to pass the Muscle Shores Bill. What the Muscle Shores Bill would have done, it was going to dam up the Tennessee River and create hydroelectric power. And then the government would start selling electricity to people in the area of the Tennessee Valley and basically compete with industry. And for Hoover, this seemed socialistic. This seemed like the government now is involved in the economy in a way that it should not be involved, so he will veto this. Later on, with the New Deal, Roosevelt will get past the Tennessee Valley Authority Act, which then eventually creates these dams, and the government does go into competition with private industry. But that's under Roosevelt. Under Hoover, he vetoes it. But like we said earlier in class, he did do much more than people ever really give him credit for. In previous panics, who did he have to look for as a role model? As we talked in class, he couldn't look at James Monroe in the Panic of 1819. You've got Martin Van Buren in the Panic of 1837. You have James Buchanan, the 1857 Panic. Of course, Grant in 1873 and Grover Cleveland in 1893. Presidents didn't do anything. The economy would just right itself. But this was a massive depression. And even though Congress and Hoover didn't always see eye to eye, some of the Republicans thought he went a little to the left for them. Some of the Democrats felt he didn't do enough. So he did have to deal with a hostile Congress. But all in all, he did do more than people give him credit for, just simply not enough. All right, so that brings an end to this lesson, a very quick one for you. Don't forget to go to Edmodo and print out the worksheet, and I'll see everybody on Monday.